Hello guys and welcome back for another Aeternum video. In New World Aeternum there are quite a lot of things that we can do on daily basis, and all those activities will include a small or a bigger group of people. Some of those activities are not so worth it when it comes down to the rewards they provide for the time invested, and that's why some of them got left behind in the priority list of every player. Those daily tasks shape the mix of the player base, as they can be found both in PvP and PvE, but one of them in particular remained untouched, and to this day it is the most difficult, the hardest to prepare, the hardest to manage, and definitely the hardest to execute content. And if you cannot guess it by now, I will help you a little bit, because this would be the 50 versus 50 war in New World Aeternum. There is quite some history behind the war scene and the 4 years of fighting on the island for the control of different territories, servers and overall power, but today we will not have a history class. Instead, we will take a closer look on how does this game mode work, what is necessary and how we can become better at something that we never did. I'm saying never did, as probably more than 90% of the player base never had a war, and from the remaining 10%, only a few had the serious ones, well prepared and organized battles. The reasons are quite known to the public and they can be pointed out by most of the older players, but since we have the war pickups coming soon in Aeternum Island, I think that I should give you a bit of a head start when it comes to understanding and the fundamentals. As the information about this game mode is quite vast, I would not be able to provide you with all the tiny details for each and every micro and macro play, but for that reason I want to remind you that our Discord community server is the right place for such discussions. There you can find a lot of builds, guides, valuable information and much more from our growing and friendly community. The link will be in the description. Alright guys, so again, same as last video, I will try to go off the script and I will try to explain as much as I can and in the shortest time as I can, because there is indeed quite a lot that can be said about the wars and all the other things related to New World. So of course, this should be separated in a couple of episodes. I will try to do it in different parts. Probably it would be a total of 3, but if we get to have too much information or we get a lot of questions by different people, then we might even extend that a little bit further. So today, which will be the part 1, will be technically the most basic and common things related to the wars, how they work, what exactly is a war, why do we need those wars, what are the benefits for having them, and of course, what is the outcome after the war for the winner and for the loser. We're gonna take a quick look about how the war technically happens in the form of those 30 minutes of PvP activity, what are the rules, and of course how a current roster for those wars look like, meaning that what is the current meta for 50 players to be completely tied together in those 10 groups of 5 people each. So without further ado, as you can see, I'm standing quite close to one of the forts and I will try to explain you, starting with what is a war, the question what is a war. I will try to explain it quite simple. So if you look into the map, this is the current map of Nissa. So if you look into the map, you would see that there is 12 territories and each and every of those territories has its own fort. You can see the fort marked like this on the map. And each and every of them will give a different benefit, but this of course is not today's topic. So on those forts, on those places, technically the war will occur and the fight for that territory control will be there. What I mean by this is, for example, that currently in Monarch's Bluff, the territory is controlled by the company named Bikini. So if we want to fight them, if we want to get their territory and win a war against them, we need to of course first declare it, and then when we declare a war, the war will technically happen in this fort, and it's gonna be the same thing all across the map in all the different forts. Now the really common thing between all the forts is that the layout for them is technically the same. Inside, when it comes to the building of the fort, everything is identical. There is no changes. There is no unique things. They have 5 doors, which are 3 in the front and 2 on the back, which you're gonna see in just a second. And then you have different placements for shops, which are in the front right, on the back right, on the back left, and then of course one other on the front left. You have also placements for specific weapons or those defensive horns, and the defender will technically start from this place here, while the attacker will be on the other so-called war camp, which is on the other side of the fort. Now, as you can see, there are 3 paths that are leading towards the fort, and in those 3 paths, those alleys, there will be the so-called points A, B, and C. Now, before those points were a respawn for the defenders, but this got changed. So now the defender, whenever someone dies, he would technically respawn in the fort. Previously, they could have also respawned on the points, but this was way too much of an advantage for the defenders, so this got changed. So this is basically a war. Now, how do we get into a war? I touched upon it just with a couple of words, but if you want to have a war with someone, you need to declare it by making an influence on that specific territory. Now, for example, if you look again into the map, you would see that there is different messages under each and every territory. For example, this one would say upcoming race. This one would say upcoming war. On some of them, you would not see anything, like it would be completely clean. And on some of them, there will be invasions, like for example, upcoming invasion. Currently, there is none, but this can happen, of course, sometimes. So, when it comes to declaring a war, you need to have an influence race, which is this one, upcoming race. You need to have this race in order to declare a war. How does that work? Well, on a specific time, for this territory would be today at 10 p.m. On this specific time, for the duration of 45 minutes, there will be an influence race between the 3 factions. The greens, as they control the territory, will be the defending one, while the yellows and the purples will have to do influence in the form of doing quests, PvP quests, or controlling those small points, those small towers. They are 3 in total, plus the big fort, which is considered also as a big tower, let's say. So by controlling those towers or doing quests, you are technically doing an influence. And whenever the influence race is over, the company that wanted to declare a war and participated can submit their request, or let's say they can submit a declaration for a war. Now, if there is, let's say, a yellow faction winning this race, only yellow companies can declare wars. If there is only one company that had enough influence, then technically this company will win the race and win the declaration of war by its own. But if you have, let's say, 3 companies in the yellow faction, and since they won the influence race, all 3 of them declare a war, then it will be a random pick of the game which of those 3 companies will declare the war. So, of course, this declaration also costs a little bit of gold, and depending on some specifics, it can be a bit cheaper or a bit more expensive, but this is just smaller details. Whenever influence is won, whenever a war is declared, on the next following day, there will be the war happening between the 2 companies. Now, as you can see here, it would show upcoming war, and it will show which is the attacking company, which is the defending one. You can also see it in the conflicts menu, so you can see at what times which wars are happening. Every defending company can set a siege window, and basically this is always in the evening, simply because most of the players are available in the evening. So of course you would see most of the wars being at 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Of course, if your company is, let's say, available earlier, you can even set it for 3 p.m., but that would be a bit strange when it comes to all the other wars as well. So whenever this happens, like I said, the war is held on that territory's fort. So, for example, today's war, which will be on Restless Shore territory, will be held in this fort, and as you can see, it looks technically the same. So, when it comes to the war, what exactly does it represent? As I said, it's played between 50 players, 50 defenders, and 50 attackers. The attackers are starting in this war camp, as I said, and they have 30 minutes to basically take the control over the fort. Now, as you can imagine, we are not talking about completely destroying the fort. We are just talking about taking control, which means that at first, when you have those 3 points of interest outside on the road, on those 3 roads technically, you would have the A, B, and C points. So as an attacker, you need to take control over those flags, because there will be a flag standing in the middle of the road. When you get control on one of the flags, basically you can start respawning there instead of inside the war camp, and this can give you some benefits. If you get 2 of the flags and only 1 is left, then you can of course respawn on both of them, so you can quickly get back into the fight. In the current meta, we always try to hold one flag, which is the outside, not really the one in the middle, because then your opponent will be spawning in 2 separate places. They can probably push you from both sides and it would be not really ideal to defend. So that's why maybe all of the companies, I wouldn't even say 99%, but all of the companies are just trying to opt for a last flag on one of the sides, and then they are trying to defend it. Now, when you get control on all 3 flags as an attacker, the fort and the doors for the fort will technically be open for damage, which means that the defenders can still enter the fort just by walking through the door, unless someone is stopping them by hits or whatever. So they can interact with the door, they can go back in, they can use the shops, they can buy repairs, they can even repair the doors. Even if a door is completely destroyed, you can get repair tools from this supply generator, and basically you can repair the door, you can bring it back to life. Now, as an attacker, it's quite the opposite. You want to destroy the doors so you can get into that fort. You want to penetrate the defenses, so you want to get in. Ideally, you want to destroy all 5 doors so you can have a nice push from all the different angles. And even when you get inside, you want to destroy the shops, for example, so your opponent, in this case, would not be able to buy the different consumables. They would not be able to buy different... technically, they are not buying the repair parts because they are free, but they would not be able to obtain them anymore because the shops will be broken, and so on. Now, of course, defenders can still repair those shops, but as you can imagine, it would be quite hard if you have opponents nearby. So this is how it works. The longer the war goes, the longer the respawn timers are. So for example, if you die in the first couple of minutes of the war, your respawn timer would be something between 5 and 10 seconds, maybe up to 15. But the longer the war goes, let's say it's 25, 28 minutes in the last couple of minutes, the respawn timers are pretty long, almost close to 45 to 50 seconds long, which means that your life is really, really important, and losing a lot of people in a short duration or a short period of time can technically mean a lost war in less than a minute. Now, how does the controlling of the point works? This is the same for the inside and for the outside points as well. As you can see, there is a flag in the middle, and there will be a circle, like a big circle, probably with a radius from here to the flag. So in this big circle, the more people you have as an attacker, the more influence you're gonna make on the flag, and basically it will start leaning towards your color. Now, if the defender is having more people, it will technically bring it back to their color and eventually recover it to, let's say, 0%. Which means that as an attacker, your goal is to try and keep a little bit of more people on the flag while trying also to kill some others which are around the point. So eventually, if you manage to kill enough people, you can send everyone to step on the flag, and then of course in the, let's say, the next 20 to 30 seconds to take completely control over the point. Once the point is taken control of and you get 100%, you completely win the war, And as long as this is before the 30-minute mark, you are now the owner of the territory. Now, I said earlier that we need to know why are those wars important and why people are doing them. Well, first, because it's quite interesting. It's really unique experience, especially for 50 against 50 when it comes to communications, when it comes to preparation, when it comes to details and all those things. But the other extremely nice factor here is that once you get the control over a territory, you would get different bonuses. Now, those bonuses will be, let's say, a discount for crafting, it would be a discount for trading, it will be a discount for all of the houses, the different houses that you can buy in the city. You can also get, of course, income from those cities, and each and every city in the world map is generating a different percentage. So, for example, the city that I'm currently in, which is Monarch's Bluff, is earning up to 7.5% from the fees contributed in the whole server. Now, if we look at other cities, like let's say Brimstone, this one can generate up to 10%. And the most profitable city of all, or at least in the current meta, is Eden Grove with 15%, up to 15%. Now, why does it say up to 15% and not 15% fixed, or let's say 7.5%? It's simply because if you want to get the highest amount of income, you need to have all of the different upgrades in the city. As you can see, this city has all of the crafting refining benches at tier 5, which is the highest. So if you get all of those things upgraded, then your city is making the highest possible income. If we try to look for another city that probably has less than tier 5, but I'm not sure if we can find one because everyone is trying to keep their cities fully upgraded so they can get the maximum benefit. Yeah, but as I said, I mean, if they are tier 4 or tier 3, this means that their income will not be, let's say, 10%, but it will be 8.5 or 9. It depends, of course, how many benches are not completely finished. So basically, those are the rules, those are the ways to get to a war, declare it, attack, defend, and try to either keep your territory or obtain a territory from your opponents. If you manage to do that in less than 30 minutes, as I said, you are the winner of the war. You get a small boost of coins, Azot, faction tokens, and of course, the biggest of all rewards, the whole territory. The next rotation, your territory will be having an influence race, and then if somebody comes to that influence race and declares a war, you will be now on the defender side and you would have to defend your territory. So that's all about it. Now I'm gonna try to explain a little bit more about the different combination of players that you need, because for 50 players there is a really specific distribution of people and the different classes necessary to have the most optimal setup. Alright, and now probably the most interesting part from today's episode, and this is basically how a roster of 50 players look like when it comes to the wars. Now, as you can imagine, we are currently 4 years into New World, and there has been probably thousands of wars, and all kinds of testing and different metas have been in place. A lot of course, people tried to define the meta by changing it, by shaping it, and whatever not. But eventually, we are currently looking into this 50-man roster that is, for the most part, the most usable one, of course, with some small tweaks and changes, of course, depending on whoever is available in that current day, or if a team has, let's say, better frontliners than DPSs or vice versa, and so on. But when we speak about roster, there is, of course, something that always is kind of stable, and we're gonna speak about it just in a second. So as you can see here, we have 10 groups, 5 groups are on the top side, and then we have another 5 groups on the bottom side. Now they are always segregated in specific places. For example, the group 1 and group 2, those are the so-called point groups. And then we have group 3 to group 6, basically still being point groups, but called out on specific places of the point, such as top right or top left, and bottom right and bottom left. Of course, there is also weak and strong side, but as I said, we will not go into that much of a complication and details. And then we have another remaining 4 groups, which in Europe are called Dex groups in general. And then in NA, I believe that they are calling them killer groups. Now, it doesn't really matter how you call them. They are basically always on specific locations. Now, the one is Group 7 in Europe is called Palisade, which is right under the fort. And then we have Group 8, which is Bonfire. Of course, there is always bonfires out in the open in the battlefield. And then we have Group 9 and Group 10 being inner and outer decks. Now, those are sitting on the side of the point, meaning that one of them is a little bit closer. This is Group 9 as an inner decks. And then we have, of course, outer decks being a little bit further away. Now, we're gonna speak more into the details of each and every group in the following episodes. I will try to explain what is their purpose, what is their core mission, how exactly they approach the different fights and so on. But for today, we will just keep it simple. So this is enough information when it comes to the groups. And now we want to see what exactly those groups are built from, and of course, the different types of classes that we can mostly see in the different wars. So under here, you can see that I've mentioned the different classes and the number of technically players in each and every roster. So we have between 10 and 11 bruisers. It really depends on the roster. Then we have always 10 plus 1 healers. I put this plus 1 because this one specific is a bit different than the other 10. And then we have IGVGs, DPS, which also can vary. It can be 5, it can be 6, it can be sometimes even 4. It really depends on the roster. And then, of course, we have the melee decks, the DPS on the deck side, and then sword and shield tank and flail tanks and so on. So, in my opinion, the 2 most important and core roles, and that's why they also have like the highest numbers, let's say, are basically the healers and the bruisers. Starting with the healers, as we can imagine, there is 10 groups, and for each group there should be 1 healer, which is basically 10 healers. And we have 1, which is the healer AoE here in group 2, for example, which is again a healer, but it's a bit more responsible towards the big Zergy clumps, or let's say the bombs, how we like to call them. So his AoEs are affecting all of the players. There is no single targets there. So he's just providing a lot of buffs and heals and whatever not into the clump, into the big beefy combat that happens on the point, in order to, of course, provide the necessary sustain to the bruisers. And then, speaking of the bruisers, this is, in my opinion, the most important class, because this is technically your front line. That's the tip of the spear of every army. And eventually, if you don't really have good bruisers, you would basically have a really hard time in a war, simply because they are the ones who have to, start stepping on the point, start fighting on the point, so they can create this pressure in order for you to obtain control over that point. And even if you have 50 really good killers, if nobody from them is actually going to the point and creating the pressure, you will eventually never be able to capture it. So in my opinion, bruisers are extremely important and core role, and that's why they are, of course, so many. And then continuing further, we can see the IGVG, which is in this case only 4 of them. But of course, like I said, it depends on the rosters. If somebody wants to play with more, maybe they can slot more, but I don't think it's necessary. Now, those are, of course, heavy class mages who are basically providing buffs and debuffs. Their purpose is not to kill people with damage, but just to provide a lot of roots, a lot of slows, a lot of debuffs on the enemy, so it can give a little bit more burst, a little bit more power to the bruisers and everyone around them. And then we have, of course, the DPS class, which is my personal, and this is mainly for the mages currently. They are located in the different groups, and of course, in the next episode, I will explain what exactly this means, like why they are in different groups and not all together, or what's their purpose. But as you can see, we have either 5 or 6, depending on what is, of course, the plan of the company. And mainly, as I said, currently we are using fire staffs. Now, this doesn't mean that as a DPS you cannot slot a bow player or a musket player, because usually those DPS classes are ranged. You can also go with like melees, but it's a bit more complicated and a bit harder for them. So mainly people opt for fire staffs, and the core reason for this is because fire staff provides not only a good damage but also an AoE damage, while the bow and the musket are a bit more single target focused and not so much AoE. So that's why I think that fire staff currently is having a bit more of a priority. And then continuing further, we have the melee decks and the DPS decks. Now, those are technically almost the same things because they are mostly melees. Currently in the meta, there is probably like 90% of the companies are running only with melee in those places, in those groups, the dex groups, because melee is extremely powerful. And as you can see here, like 2 or even sometimes 3 of those melees are in heavy class, which means that they are extremely beefy, extremely strong. They are technically almost tanky, and then they also have those melee players who are also considered as DPS, and that's why I put like DPS decks here instead of just DPS, because they can be medium players with spear, let's say with hatchet, also with void gauntlet, for example. So technically they are not a fire staff DPS, which is running in light gear from a distance, but they are providing this huge damage burst on closer targets. So you can, of course, switch in between them. You can also put someone in range, but I don't think you would get that much of a benefit. So that's why you have mostly melee classes here in those 4 groups. And then, of course, the last 2 that we have to speak about is the Sword and Shield tank and, of course, the Flail tank. Now, those classes, you would not really see that many numbers from them, simply because the bonuses that you get from them are not stackable. So, for example, the Sword and Shield has an aura that provides a damage mitigation to all the surrounding allies in 4 meters distance. So, if you have 2 of those Sword and Shields and they are sitting close to each other, this aura would not duplicate. So, this means that you are technically losing 1 person, and there is no need for that. So, that's why people are running with only 1. The flail is almost the same thing, so you don't really get additional benefits for having the same class over and over again, especially for the buffs and the debuffs. So that's why it has to be well distributed in order to get the maximum benefit. Now, as I said, today, guys, we are going over just the basics. So we will try to just keep it simple. If you, of course, have some questions or you think that I've missed something, please hit me up in the comments or just join the Discord and tell me there. We can have, of course, a quick discussion about it. I can try to even go into more details. But like I said, in the next upcoming episodes, I will touch upon the different groups, what is their core mission in a war, what they should be aiming to do, how they also, traverse through the terrain, because in every different city, let's say, or a different place that the wars occur, there is some small things and differences when it comes to the layout outside of the fort. As I've mentioned, the forts are always the same, but outside it's a bit different. And of course, the different meta and how it evolved in terms of micro and macro is always changing. So I will just give you some examples. I will show you some cool and different things that you can use in your wars. And hopefully, when the pickup wars come in Season 10, you will be already with some knowledge about what is going to happen in your games, because I really think that it's a nice game mode, but if you completely don't have a clue what is happening, you might be left with a little bit of a bitter feeling, and you would not really be happy with your experience. So yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching, and again, if you have any questions, hit me up. I will be super happy to try to explain, of course, and to answer them. So don't be shy, hit it up, and let's see. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you on the next one.